Welcome back. Let's do some tests that are a little bit more difficult to do. If we make this a little bit smaller, let's just have npm run test, just to have it running in the background. That's always nice. And let's go into our card or counter button, because this is a little bit more unique, right? It's not a stateless component anymore. We actually have a state with the count, and yeah, we have a little bit more logic. We also have this set state that is happening, where we increment our state count. And I think in the previous video, I had this as a separate method that you can call in here. For now, we can just leave it the way it is. The idea is that we want to test this state function, that it actually increments, because that's what you expect from a counter button. So how are we going to test that? As we know, the very first step is to actually create a test file. So let's say counter button .test.js. And the first thing we want to do, well, again, we've already kind of done this before, so I'm going to copy from the card list test. Let's close some of these just to clean things up. And copy and paste this. Now, instead of card list, we're testing the counter button. And we also don't really need our mock robots anymore. And this counter button doesn't have any props that it receives. Well, it has the color prop actually. So let's just do a const mock color. And we'll say that this mock color would just be red. And we'll give it a, make sure this is an actual component. We'll give it a color of mock color. Now, here's the thing. Even though it's a stateful component, we can still do match snapshot testing to it. I mean, it's still a component. So let's save. And now we have a new snapshot. Perfect. So if we ever modify counter button, it's going to error out. That's good. Let's make this a little bit smaller. All right, let's create another test in here. And by the way, if you want, you could use the describe and then group all the tests together. But I've already shown you how to do that. You can do that on your own if you want to have more organization for your tests. Let's have another test this time that we'll say we want to make sure that it correctly increments the counter. And again, our usual syntax, and in here we can write tests. So what can we do? Well, first things, let's just do a const wrapper. And this is just going to be the shallow rendering of our component. And we'll just have a mock color as well that we're going to use. All right, so now that we have this, instead of just always typing expect and then doing this shallow, we can just say expect wrapper, and we can write more tests that way. In here, let's say that we want to have wrapper.find. Another thing that we get with the enzyme package. So on the wrapper, just like we would in jQuery or query select all, we can do something like find, where we find, let's say, the ID, and this has to be square brackets actually, where we have ID of counter. By doing this, I can now go into my counter button and just give it an ID of counter. And we'll make sure that we make the snapshot pass. And now we can find this ID counter, which is the button now, And we can do something called simulate. And we can simulate an event, such as a click event, which our counter has, an onClick event. So we've just simulated a click on this counter button. So if we've simulated a click on the counter button and the state count or the count in the state is 0, we expect the count now to be 1. So all we would need to do is say expect wrapper. We can use something called state. So this is going to grab the state, and we expect that state to equal count of 1. Let's see if that actually works. Let me add some semicolons here. All right. Everything is passing, but again, we want to make sure that it's actually testing what we want. Let's say this is 0 now. Oh, it's failed. And let's go back again just to make sure our thing passes. I'm going to simulate a click again. So if I go, nope, now it's expecting a count of 2. So I change this to 2, and our tests are passing. That's pretty cool. Now, if I remove this counter, and I have 2 failed tests now, because on top of running the snapshot, which fails now because we've changed the look of the component, we've also removed the way for us to grab that component by ID. And you can see that method simulate is only meant to be run on a single node, 0 found, because we weren't able to find the ID of counter. And you can do many things here to grab an object. I usually like having an ID because, well, it just reads nicely. But that's pretty cool, right? We just, in very simple way, tested our state. And once again, don't get overwhelmed by all this wording with the Jest cheat sheet and the enzyme documentation. You can pick this up in a day fairly easy. And I don't remember all of these. I usually go to their documentation and say, oh yeah, they have a simulate method. Oh yeah, they have the state method to grab the state. And that's how you work as a developer. You don't have an encyclopedia all in your head of all the methods. You just know that this is what enzyme and Jest do. Let me go check out their documentation and see how I can grab state. Oh, and by the way, if I add, again, remember, this is JavaScript. We're just going one by one. If I add here another click, and at the bottom here, I run another expect, I'm going to expect that it's now a 3. And you see that all my tests still pass because everything happens sequentially. And if I add another click here, then I can, or let's say this one is going to be a key press. Even if there's a key press on there, because there's no key press event, I still expect the state of count to equal 3. There you go. Now, when you're testing, there's so many things that you can test for. You can just keep going and keep going and keep going. But you want to use your time wisely. Does this test, is it enough to move on to other tests? And it's always a trade-off on how your project is doing, how much other tests your project have, and how much time and resources you have to write tests. Let's do one last one. I'm going to expect that the wrapper dot props to, let's say, to equal, let's say, color red. Let's see if that works. All right, I got a failed test, and that's because I was just kind of guessing based on state whether it has the props and to equal. So let's scroll up, and we see that we expected color red, but instead we got a ton of other props because, well, we have color red, but we also get children, and we also have ID as well as the onClick event. Another thing we can do here is perhaps just do color. Let's save. And now we get red, which is good. So we want to say to equal red. And there you go. Our test pass. We do have a console log here, which is kind of annoying. So let's remove that from the counter button. And there you go. Our tests are passing and looking very, very nice. I hope that you got a general idea of how to test components. And by the way, this snapshot folder, you're going to actually include that in your GitHub or whatever source control you have. You're going to push that and commit it to your project, because any new developer that comes onto the project is going to download the latest master. And you also want to make sure that they have these snapshots, so when they run the tests and they modify a component, these snapshots are going to check against the old version and make sure that this new developer doesn't change anything. So again, these things are also going to go into your source control or version control. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.